The lights of the motel promise safety. The man senses that the solution to his predicament begins there.
Here's a game, Alan Wake's American Nightmare, coming out at a very unique time in digital media. Alan Wake's American Nightmare came out at a time where Xbox Live Marketplace and the PlayStation Store were kind of finding their feet. There was still some games coming out, mostly arcade ports or old console ports or unique indie smaller games, more basic games. Alan Wake's American Nightmare came out whilst that was all kind of finding its feet. This came out more so like a DLC as opposed to a sequel. Having said that, I've never played the original game, and I know that this DLC has very little, if nothing, to do with the original game in terms of a story. The gameplay elements are still the same from what I can tell, and the gameplay is what this is really focused on. The storyline isn't that great, but I digress. Let me take you back, and as I said, I haven't played the original game, and that is a bit of a shame because I was a huge fan of the original first two Max Paynes, not really the third one, but the first two, and this game, American Nightmare, is made, well, and Alan Wake is made by the same people that made those original Max Payne games, that being Remedy. So I had high hopes of this at the time, but I just never got around to playing it. In all, I can't really rate this game very highly. I'm trying to keep in mind that this is more of a short DLC type game and not a full fleshed out production, but there are just huge issues that I have with this. And it's not all bad. I really enjoy the Twilight Zone theme that you kind of fall in and out of the different levels with a narrator who's actually really awesome, does a great job, sounds great, really adds to the atmosphere. And the atmosphere in the levels is actually really awesome, and I think that's a carryover from the original game. I remember all the trailers and promos. It was a horror, dark, eerie, interesting kind of game, and this really carries that through. It was visually really appealing to me for that atmosphere and for that kind of eeriness. So the game does a good job there. I assume that there's quite a small budget gone into this, and it's a shame we didn't get a fully fleshed out sequel. This is a short game. I think I completed it in a couple of hours, really. And that's okay. I was kind of hoping that would be the case. I was looking for a short in and out experience. Sometimes those are the best ones. You don't have to have a 10-hour campaign to fully flesh it out. So that was another positive for me. And more positives, the main villain of this game, I don't think he's in the original one. I could be wrong there. The main villain here has tremendous charisma, really is one of the highlights of this game. He has various cutscenes, both in in-game textures, but also these really awesome sort of video clips that you stumble across, which you can tell is live action, but really kind of bizarre, almost snuff film-like footage of this psychopath who kind of loses control. And you can kind of find these. You can miss them, which is a real shame. But you can also hopefully stumble across many of them, and it does kind of lead you to explore a little bit to try and pick up some of these, because like I said, this is probably the highlight of the game. Really awesome job done here by the actor, and a really interesting concept that the team put together and really fulfilled here. There's even one point where you're in or a couple of points where you're in a movie drive-in cinema, and he has these clips playing on the big screen, and it just it really adds to the atmosphere, as I mentioned previously. However, the negatives here really do outweigh the good for me. As I said, I'm a huge fan of the Max Payne games, and I really do enjoy horror. Watching horror more than playing it, but I do enjoy playing it as well. So I don't really know why I never got around to playing the Alan Wake games originally. But judging from this, I know that the original is highly regarded, but judging from this, American Nightmare, which is also quite well regarded, I didn't miss much. The gameplay is quite disappointing for me. It's an interesting concept. There's no bullet time like you get in Max Payne. Here, Alan's got his trusty torch, which you kind of have to zap your foes with before they become vulnerable to gunfire. Um, it sounds like a fairly interesting concept, but unfortunately, it doesn't really offer much in a way of challenge or in the way of fun gunfights. A few enemies need to be tackled in different ways, but there's only about 5 total enemy types to deal with here. Usually you're only being hit from one of those types at a time, occasionally 2 variants, but it really doesn't keep things flowing interestingly or creatively. You kind of end up just pointing your torch and shooting, pointing your torch, shooting, running, dodging, point a torch, shoot. Occasionally there's enemies that you just shoot. Occasionally there's enemies that you just use your torch on. It's really not that captivating after you go through things. And with this being a short game, although there's some cool storylines in this, that's you really need strong gameplay to carry this through. And I'm quite surprised actually when I've read some other reviews on this, because it was praised for having various different guns, something the original apparently lacked. And in my eyes, you don't really need a lot of different guns. You get I mean, there is a decent size of arsenal that you can unlock. You do have to go through and pick up different bits of paper or script to unlock different weapons, but in reality, you only really need the first couple of guns that you get. There's an awesome shotgun and also the assault rifle. You really don't need any other guns. In fact, that's all the guns that I used to complete the game, which is a bit of a shame. You do occasionally get use of a flashbang, which takes out enemies quicker because it makes them vulnerable rather than using your flashlight. And also a flare, which comes in handy to take down objects that need zapping for longer periods of time. So a bit of a disappointment really. What's built as a tense dark game with potential unique tactical fights turns into more of run and gun and not really thinking than anything else. It's a huge shame. So I mentioned the story earlier briefly, and I want to just talk about that at the moment because, well, the narrator and the main villain do a great job at drawing you in with great charisma and building to the atmosphere. The actual storyline, it's actually fairly limp. There are some friendly NPCs that you come across that help you in the levels, but the dialogue between these Alan and these NPCs is just really shallow, almost laughable at times. It's quite disappointing. Another massive, probably the biggest disappointment is, whilst this game is short, only a few hours long, even if you go exploring, I can't imagine this taking longer than 5 hours. The main issue there is that there are only really 3 levels, 3 small stages in the game, and worst of all, you have to repeat these 3 stages 3 times. So you go through the first set of stages thinking, actually this is getting somewhere, things are building up, enemies are quite easy at the moment, but you can see that they might become difficult, or that they never really do. You kind of get to the end of the 3rd level and you zap back into the first level again, only things are pretty much the same actually, thinking about it. The only thing that changes is some of the NPCs have already done some of the tasks for you, so the actual stage becomes much shorter in terms of the objective. Instead of doing 5 things, you now only have to do 3 things, which are the same things that you've done previously, but with an extra enemy or 2 chucked at you. And then when you come to the 3rd stage, or the 3rd set of going through these 3 stages, instead of doing 3 things, you now have to do 2 or 1 thing. And it's just really limits the gameplay, and it's really disappointing, to be honest with you. I get that this is a small budget game, DLC game, when DLC games weren't really a thing, but you would expect a lot more variety. Even if there was only 3 stages, make them bigger, make it is kind of open world, but it needs to be done in a much more expansive way than this. So, all in all, I have tried to keep in mind that this is a short DLC game that came out at a time when short DLC games weren't really a thing in terms of unique IP. It was more, or at least big IP. It was more independent IPs, smaller IPs, and arcade ports or retro ports. So I have tried to keep that in mind. But when you look at Remedy and you look at Max Payne, what they've done before, Alan Wake was a big success, and then they put this out. It's really just too poor in too many areas. I'm not going to talk about how the story ends or how the campaign ends, but from a gameplay and even narrative, it's really bad, in my opinion. There is an arcade mode. I didn't feel the need to play that. I kind of guess that it's more run and gun, which you kind of do in the whole story mode. So yeah, the more and more I talk about this and the more I think about this, the less I actually like it. And I feel like I'm being a bit harsh because it was fairly fun to sit through and blast some demons. But all in all, it was just too repetitive and too narrow in scope. So yeah, that was a game.